We've already read chapter 33 a couple of times. I have just the last part of Genesis chapter 33 from verse approximately 22 to the end. And this is where he is separating his wives into groups and sending them over on the other side of the stream, apparently the Yabok or the Jabbok. And he is staying on that side of the stream by himself, seemingly. And he is having an episode of wrestling with God. He, according to his own words, an angel in your text and a man also in your text. So we have, he wrestles with a man, he wrestles with God, and he wrestles with an angel. And there's not real clear certainty about what's going on there, but he interprets it a certain way himself. So I know that we've read this a couple of times, so what I want to do is just briefly touch on this and explore some ideas, because we didn't have a lot of time to do that the last time we were together. So let's talk a little bit about that, this idea of wrestling with God. What do we think about what kind of symbolism might be? What do you think that this is symbolizing, this Jacob wrestling with an angel, wrestling with God, wrestling with a man? What are your thoughts on that, Tracy?
Well, I relate it back to, and I have it's a bit deep study, but just, how it seems to be a representation of the Messiah, who is the Word of God.
Okay. Start there. Well, in what way do you see this as the Messiah, Jacob wrestling with the Messiah?
Well, there's, like I said, it's kind of hard to go into. There's a lot of trails. His name is the thing that's really I hook onto in here.
Okay.
Jacob asks his name. He says, "Why do you ask my name?"
Mm-hmm.
And then there's another account of this in Judges when Samson's parents.
Yeah.
They meet with a messenger, and it's the same type of situation. They say the same thing. They ask him what his name is, and he says, "Why do you ask my name? It is too wonderful for you."
Right.
And then they say the same thing. We've seen the face of God.
Mm-hmm. So I'm curious about. I can see a definite connection there. How are you connecting those to the Messiah?
Because no one has seen the Father except the Son reveals him. There's a lot of other little things that I just see the Messianic picture in there,
mm-hmm.
but his name being the thing that I really, like I was saying, really cling to here is
mm-hmm.
that he doesn't tell them his name,
mm-hmm.
because if we understand his name is called the Word of God,
mm-hmm.
and it's too wondrous for you,
mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
that is why he can't tell it to you.
Yeah.
And so we have this understanding that he is wrestling with the Word of God, because spiritually speaking, this makes sense. It's hard to explain to someone unless they experienced it. But when you wrestle with the Word and prevail, you say, "I will not give up until you bless me."
Mm-hmm.
That's, I think, the picture that we're seeing here, and the lesson we're supposed to be learning from this. Is
right.
that Israel are those who have wrestled with the Word of God. And there's another picture of him wrestling with God, with man. People wrestle with the thought of Messiah being a man, and the thought of Messiah being God. So it's all in here. This whole thing is in here.
That's good.
And so he says, "I will not let go until you bless me."
Mm-hmm.
This is what I try to impress upon people when it comes to reading the Word and not understanding it and just giving up.
Sure.
Don't give up.
Yeah.
Cling to it. And I have a bunch of stuff on this just about clinging to and grabbing onto God
mm-hmm.
and His Word,
mm-hmm.
to the Messiah. There's this picture all throughout the Scripture of that.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's what we're seeing. And when you persevere, when you overcome, He calls you Israel.
Mm-hmm.
You walk differently than everyone else now.
You're limping.
Yeah, there's more stuff on that. Like, if you look at that word, the one who halted. That's what this word is, this halting, this limping word. Again, throughout the Scriptures, that's who he's going to save, the one who halted.
Yeah.
There's just a lot of neat stuff in here.
Yeah, I think that's excellent insight. Let me ask you or anyone who wants to address this. How would you explain the tremendous difference in the life of Jacob as compared to the life of Abraham and the life of Isaac? I mean, we know that Abraham had some challenges. Isaac, as far as we know, had very little. Obviously, there's not nearly as much in the scriptures dealing with Isaac. He's a rather shadowy figure. There's not a lot of information about him there. We have him having a bit of contention with the people of Gerar, those Philistines, Abimelech and his commander. But it seems like Jacob is very, very different than his father and his grandfather. And he does have to struggle tremendously. Do you see any kind of a picture in that? I know that there's a picture there somehow. I'm not exactly sure what it means and what these patriarchs represent. The patriarchs are obviously so incredibly powerful as representatives of our faith because our faith is kind of named after them. In a sense, our nation is named after Israel, but our God identifies himself as the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob continuously. And these three central figures play such a huge role. But I wonder why Abraham had certain struggles of his own. Isaac seems to have certain struggles of his own, but they're definitely different than his father Abraham's. And then Jacob seems to just struggle and struggle and struggle until the day he dies. He doesn't seem to get a break. You know what I mean? What do you guys make of that? That division between the three patriarchs. Angela?
Well, when you say that Jacob struggled until the day he died, he suffered, and he had 12 sons.
Mm-hmm.
You think of Messiah, who suffered, had 12 disciples, and was very fruitful.
And was what?
Very fruitful.
Fruitful is, yeah.
Each of the personality. I don't want to say God only has three parts. Because
Sure.
He might have more, but from what we've read, it seems like those three at least you can identify.
Yeah.
And that the one suffered.
Yeah.
And the other two didn't
Right.
necessarily.
Yeah, not nearly as much. I mean, we know that they had some challenges, but man, Jacob seems to really have some serious struggles. I like your idea about him being kind of like a representative of the Messiah. To see the kind of a word picture there with him being like the Messiah in a way. Really struggling and suffering, and yet so incredibly fruitful at the same time. It's a good insight, Tracy.
I think I see Jacob as more of I relate to him as God's people, like a representative a little bit more, I guess, because of the picture of the story that I see there is it's our redemption story here as well. We go from being Jacob, which means hand on heel, and that I imagine as struggling in life, trying to keep Satan from bringing his foot down on your head, to ruling with God.
Yeah.
And that's what Israel means. To rule with God, it actually means a lot more than that too. But this journey that he goes through, it's like it gives me hope to know that we have struggled with God and with men. We struggle with God's word, trying to do what is right, and we've struggled with men. We've struggled in the body, without the body, So when we can get to that point where we prevail, there's hope.
Yeah.
You were once hand on heel, but now you
Right.
with God.
Right.
That's what we're looking forward to.
Yeah. There's a big struggle going on, and Jacob is an excellent picture of that struggle. And I know I myself also really familiar. I feel really familiar with Jacob. Like I haven't had nearly the struggles that he has had, but the life of struggle that we have, we can definitely associate with Jacob and feel that a sense of affinity with him much more than Isaac and Abraham. Abraham and Isaac to me seem lofty and very, very different than us. And I don't know why that is. I know that the Bible is not presenting us with everything that these people ever did, but the highlights that are important to the message that Moses is being instructed to teach us about. So I know that, maybe Abraham and Isaac had, more struggles than we have had revealed to us. But Jacob definitely, you feel that sense of affinity with him for sure. Now, in relation to like Jacob and his name change being, changed to Israel, you notice that there are only a handful of people in the Bible who have experienced a name change. Can you identify who they are? Abraham had his name changed. Who was it? Sarah had her name changed. Jacob has his name changed. Joshua has his changed, kind of, yeah.
Which one had their name changed to Israel?
Jacob,
Jacob.
yeah. Now, who did I just say?
You said Joshua.
Joshua, yes. His name, as well, he's called Hoshea at one point, and then Yehoshua, and then I'm thinking also of Naomi. Changed her name to what? Mara. Yep. So, but now something interesting about like just comparing Jacob and having his name changed and Abraham having his name changed. Abraham's name is changed from Abram to Avraham, and you would never see him referred to as Abraham again, period, ever. In fact, it's considered in rabbinic Jewish circles, it would be insulting to call Abraham Avram. They consider that insulting. And his name is never, ever used as Avram again. But Jacob, even though he has his name changed to Israel, it's really spotty. Sometimes he's called Jacob still, and sometimes he's called Israel. And I wonder, A, have you thought about why that is? And B, have you thought about under what circumstances each of those names is used? Is there something in the text that ties together that when he is called Jacob? And is there something in the text that ties together when he is called Israel? Is it circumstantial? Why do you think that is? To both of those parts of the question, you have any ideas about that? Mikey?
I've tried to figure that out many times.
I did too, and I got to tell you that I didn't have a lot of success. I know there's a great mystery there. I don't know what it is. And in fact, I did a bunch of research myself, and I tried to figure out, is there some common similarity to when his name is, when he is called Jacob? I couldn't see anything. And I know that must not be unusual because I looked at rabbinic sources who, these guys have been studying the Torah and trying to figure things out for thousands of years, longer than we have, and they have no idea either. There's a lot of weird speculation. Nothing to me that seemed, lights go on, bingo, that's really cool. I didn't see anything like that. I just wondered if you guys had ideas about why he gets his name changed, but it doesn't stick, if you want to put it that way. He keeps being called back and forth. I had an idea that it's interesting that when Abraham had his name changed, he was never called Abraham again, but Jacob, though, continues to kind of vacillate. To me, he continues to vacillate between struggling with the flesh and struggling with God. And I wondered, I didn't have enough time this week to kind of dig into that to explore it, but there's a possibility there that the circumstances surrounding when his name is used in different ways, whether he's called Jacob or Israel, might have something to do with, because he is continuously struggling with God and man. You might think, based on him struggling with God here and then having a limp, and based on our discussion just now, it's like, well, his walk is different. He is a little bit different, but very much the same. He still has struggles with his flesh. He's still, And you know what it made me think of? I think it was Grant Luton once who said that learning to walk by faith is like walking in the dark through the wilderness on a stormy night where there's lightning and thunder, and the lightning bolt flashes across the sky and you can see everything clearly for just that split second when the lightning bolt goes off. And then you can see ahead of you just enough to walk maybe 50 to 100 yards. And you are then having to kind of stop and wait for the next lightning bolt to go off, so that you can see a little bit more. And that's kind of like the walk of faith, is that you walk in the revelation that you have at the time as far as you can with what you remember from your revelation. And it seemed to me that maybe Jacob had this defining moment of seeing God and wrestling with God, and some great revelation happened to him, but it only lasted for a certain period of time, and then he had to kind of struggle again, because the next thing we see is him struggling with this situation with Dinah and the Shekemites, and he made some catastrophic errors there that cost him dearly. So it's not like he suddenly he wrestles with God and has his name changed and he's this super holy spiritual person from now on. It's like that was a flash of lightning, and it affected his walk for a time, but it wasn't continuous. And I think that goes along maybe with what Tracy was saying a moment ago, is that he did struggle with God and he did have an epiphany and it did change his walk, but it didn't mean that he was perfect. Evidenced by the fact that here we all are studying the Torah and trying to adopt a Torah lifestyle, and we've had this great revelation. Has your life changed 180 degrees? Not really. I know mine hasn't. I know that it was a tremendous flash of wisdom and insight from God, but did it change me completely? No, it changed me a little bit at a time, and I don't know why we would expect anything different. We just don't. We're creatures of habit, and it takes us time and continuous flashings of maybe that same revelation for it to stick. And I think that maybe looking at Jacob's name change in relation to when he is struggling with spiritual principles or when he is struggling with physical principles might have something to do with it. Just something to look into. You might make a note to yourself to dig a little deeper into that, and I intend to do that as well. Any comment? Go ahead.
Well, throughout the Tanakh, Israel is referred to either Israel or Jacob as the people, not just him as well. So
Yes.
there's something more.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's something that you gotta, if you're gonna do like a word search, obviously make sure that you're referencing him and not the people of Israel, because the people of Israel are sometimes called Jacob and Israel. Sometimes the people of Israel are called Jacob in a metaphorical sense, and Israel in a formal title type of sense. So definitely do continue to take a look at that. Any other insights that you have in regards to his struggle with God? Yes, sir.
The one thing that's always stuck out to me is the wording here is the same used as Revelation. Those who inherit life and eternal life overcome. To the ones who overcome. And Revelation speaks about the churches who overcome. So with his name changed to Israel because he overcame, is like a foreshadowing was when he says, if you want to become Israel, my people, you have to overcome the obstacles, the flesh.
Great insight. Absolutely. Yeah, that's isn't it? I'm thinking, Darren, that you're absolutely right, and that's a keen insight regarding those who overcome. Isn't that mentioned another time or two by Messiah himself? And not in the book of Revelation, but in the Gospels?
Yeah.
I thought it was. And that's a challenging statement, because, coming from where many of us have, and with a kind of a church background, is we've had, unfortunately, a perception in our minds that it's once saved, always saved, just kind of, you believe that Jesus is the Messiah and you're good to go, And having to overcome and wrestling with both God and man and ourselves. And I think that maybe we could put wrestling with ourselves in that category of wrestling with man. That's our biggest battle right there. And it constantly tells us that the victory goes to those who overcome. And I think that's a great picture to kind of overlay on this section here to be an encouragement to us to remember to struggle, to actually remember that struggle is okay. You know, that's a real challenge. And because I think, you know, too often it can happen that, you know how sometimes like unbelievers might say to people who turn to religion, well, that's like a crutch, you know what I'm saying? And I have always thought, you know, yeah, religion is a crutch because we need crutches. We're crippled, you know, we definitely, it's okay. But I see that, you know, they make it as a derogatory comment to say, oh, you know, religion is a crutch. And so because I think a lot of times people come to the Messiah, come to God because their lives are falling apart. And somebody tells them about God, and because they're kind of on the down and out and things aren't going well in their lives or whatever, they turn to God. That is such a really, really common thing that happens with people who turn to God or turn to religion or whatever. It's when they're struggling in their lives. And sometimes the people who are evangelizing them can kind of lead them to believe that when they turn to God, that everything's going to be okay, that everything's going to become easier, that the challenges are going to diminish, and that you know. Now, is that true? Is that true that, you know, that your life is going to become easier when you turn to God?
I think how you deal with life can become easier.
Yes. 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 I think that's absolutely true. And I remember Angie's pastor from years and years ago, a guy named Daryl Dyke, used to say that there really is no growth without suffering, and that a person who is the Messiah's and who is a believer in God and is trusting God, their suffering is redemptive because they can have peace in the midst of suffering. And how we respond to trials and difficulties in life is what sets us apart from others, because we're all struggling and we all have things to overcome, but how we respond to those struggles is redemptive, not only for us, but for the people around us. And I think that Jacob is a pretty good picture of that, because is he blessed? He's tremendously blessed. He absolutely is. He's fruitful. He's wealthy. God is on his side and takes his side against his enemies and makes things turn out okay for him. He does have a positive outcome, but he has plenty of struggles. That's what we have. We have a lot of struggles in our life, and that's why I think Jacob is such a great picture for us to continuously look at and examine his life and find out he didn't always respond the best way when struggles or challenges faced him. But we can learn from that a lot. So that's good insight. Do you have any ideas regarding this next section here where he's going to, in Genesis chapter 33, he's going to meet Esau. And he divides his children between Leah and Rachel and the two slave girls, and he puts the slave girls and their children first, and Leah and her children second, and then Rachel and Joseph last. And then he himself passed on ahead of them and prostrated himself to the ground and such. Have you heard anything, or do you have any ideas regarding why he might have split up his family in this way? Is there some significance to that? It almost can seem like he's putting the least important ones first and putting them closer to danger and keeping his treasured ones last. That his favorite wife Rachel and his favorite son Joseph are in the back, farthest away from danger, and the slave girls and their children are the closest to the danger. Now he himself is going ahead of them to protect, to stand up for the family himself. But do you find it curious in some sense that they're ordered in this way? Why wouldn't you just present them as a group with himself at their head instead of dividing them up like that? Any ideas in that regard? That's okay.
We talked about it last time a little bit about, not wanting the entire family wiped out.
Now that, I was thinking, was from the previous chapter where he divided himself into two camps, but we never actually saw any suggestion in the text that he actually did that. It says he divided his family into two camps. He says, I've become two camps. If my brother comes and attacks one, the other will be able to escape. But we don't see him actually doing it, and we don't know who's part of which group. This is the only division that we see in the text, is him putting them like this, and this is not two groups, this is three groups. Do you see any significance in that? Whether it's two groups or three groups, or whether he did or did not divide his family into two groups so that one could escape? Because this isn't about escape. This is just, here we are, my brother's here, let's go ahead and go and meet him. I just wondered about that. I don't have any answers. I wondered if you guys did. I'm a little curious about that. It seems, I suppose it could be that he put the least significant ones first.
But then when his brother asked what is the whole meaning of this caravan, he says to find favor. So whatever he did was to try to find some type of favor for his brother.
Well, his brother is specifically talking about what is the meaning of all of this gift that you sent over. And so I think his brother's talking about that. But then he says, well, who are these with you? So I don't know why he separated them in that way. Maybe it was, I don't know.
Talking about how he separated the family?
He separated his own family. Have idea?
No.
No. Michael? No ideas from you, sir. All right. I'll let it go. Put it in your margin. Might be something there for later. Anyway, why do you think that Jacob said that seeing Esau's face was like seeing the face of God? Do you find that's kind of curious in that he just said moments ago, I've seen God face to face, and then he says, oh, seeing your face is like seeing the face of God. What does that mean? Sorry? Oh, that's the baby. I thought the baby was saying, I want to say something. Okay. I'm curious about that. Maybe there's some kind of spiritual significant metaphor going on there, but in what way do you think that what did he mean by saying, seeing your face is like seeing the face of God and you have accepted me and whatnot? Tracy?
I don't know. Just when you said that, it made me think about some of the New Testament writings about you can't love your brother who you've seen. How can you love God who you have not seen? And maybe there's some kind of relation to loving God, loving brother.
That's interesting.
Like that, but I'm not sure.
That is interesting. Yeah. You know what? Let me ask you my next question, and that might kind of tie in with that previous one so that we can...
Be frightened and happy at the same time?
Yes, absolutely. I think that could be. Being frightened of his brother and yet happy to see him at the same time, I definitely see that. You know that when you think of Esau, what people group do you associate with Esau right now, current modern day? As a person who, a Christian or whatever, how do you view Esau today? Where are the people of Esau today? Do you know it? What would you say? Some Christians say, well, the Esau is definitely the Palestinians, for example.
Esau, the Muslim nation.
Muslim nations, yes. Angela?
Is it the same as Edom?
Yeah.
Rome.
Darren?
I've heard a couple different things. One teaching that stuck out to me is that Ishmael is the Arab people, but Esau would be like, they actually narrowed down to like the Gaza Strip, the descendants of the Edomites.
I think that's a common perception among Christians, is that the descendants of Esau must be some type of Muslim peoples that are surrounding Israel at this current time and fighting against them. They see somehow that struggle between Jacob and Esau with the current struggle that's going on over in Israel with the Palestinians and the Jews, or whatever. It's interesting that the Jews don't see it that way at all. The Jews actually see it, as Angela suggested, they think that Esau and his descendants became the Romans. I don't know what, I have looked into this a little bit, and I don't know exactly why they come to that conclusion, but the Jews actually think that Edom is Rome, and they think specifically that the Roman Catholic Church and Christianity in general is Esau. That's a very interesting perception. Whether or not the descendants of Esau literally were, traveled up north into the Italian peninsula and became the Italians and then, established the city of Rome. There was a couple of interesting things from history as regard to the founders of Rome and the Jews making a connection between some of Esau's descendants and the founders of Rome. It's interesting. It's not definitive to me as a historian, a person who studies history. It didn't line up perfectly, but it was suggestive. And it's just interesting to me that the Jews themselves see Esau's descendants as Christians. And that injects all kinds of weird and fascinating ideas into Jacob versus Esau into the biblical text. I can see some really interesting things there.
Some people think it's Russia too. Russian people.
Yeah.
The red and
Right. It's kind of curious. But if it is, let's say for the sake of discussion, that Esau is Christianity, the Roman brand of Christianity, for example, does that change anything with your ideas regarding this interpretation of these passages and what Esau might represent? Does that suggest anything to you?
Yeah.
How so?
I don't know enough to say anything yet.
You don't know enough to say anything yet? Is it going to be a couple of minutes, or should we?
No. I'm looking at the order of the animals that were presented and the order of the way the children, and the maids and children lay and her children raped. Because it's not only that he sends them out in that order, but then they bow down to Esau in that order.
And I assume that you're attaching some significance that Benjamin, the son of the right hand, was the only child who did not bow to Esau.
Well, I wasn't, but I'm going to make a note of that.
I don't know.
Benjamin's territory is where the temple is.
That is correct. Benjamin's territory is where the temple is. And the Jews, for some reason, I don't know where this idea came from. Maybe it's in the Talmud. I'd have to look it up. There has been speculation that many of the Jews who believed in Yeshua when he arrived the first time were actually Benjamites. I don't know whether that's true or not, and I don't exactly remember where I heard that, but there's a perception out there somewhere that many of the original followers of Yeshua were actually Benjamites. I don't know where that came from. It's an interesting idea, though. So you notice in this section that Jacob's kind of talking with his brother, and his brother is saying, I will... We talked briefly before about that kind of fascinating idea. It was fascinating to me about Jacob trying to give the blessing back to his brother that he had stolen, and that it literally says in the text of verse 11 of chapter 33, "Take my blessing I have brought for you, for God has dealt kindly with me, and I have everything." That was a curious and fascinating insight. But notice that he says, let's take off. I'll go first. His brother Esau says, but Jacob's like, I got to go slow with the children and the animals. I got to move at a slow pace because they'll all die if I don't. You go on ahead and I'll catch up with you in Seir. Does he ever go to Seir?
No.
He never goes to Seir. Was that something that he just was telling his brother? It's like, yeah, you go on ahead and I'll catch up with you, and he just never did because he didn't intend to?
What is Seir mean?
Seir is the mountainous region. It's an area. I don't know what the word... I don't know exactly. Does anyone have that Hebrew word for Seir? That is in the end of verse 16.
Hairy or shaggy,
That's what it means.
rough. That's what a round travers says.
Somehow connected with Edom and Esau, because they are all, one is red and ruddy, and
It comes from the word Sair, which is he-goat, shaggy, devil, hairy.
does that suggest something to you, Angela?
No, not yet.
Okay. You notice there's something interesting going on here, I think, with him saying to his brother, I'm going to slow down to the pace of the children and the animals, and you go on ahead. And it says here, there's no need for my Lord to be so kind when you're offering me to have some of your people with me. He says, I'll slow down and go at the pace of the cattle and the children until I come to my Lord in Seir. So he tells him, I'm coming there. Now there is, and I would suggest that you just put a little note in your margin there to look at Obadiah, chapter 1, verse 21. There is some type of a prophecy there that seems to be a prophetic shadow picture of the Messiah himself leading his own people to the mountainous region of Seir to actually destroy them when he returns.
What chapter?
Obadiah chapter 1, verse 21. That there is a prophecy that seems to be highly suggestive of Messianic times when the Messiah himself will lead his people to the regions of Edom, and there's a great battle there, and it's suggestive of destruction of some type happening. And that just made me think that maybe Jacob was speaking prophetically because he never went there. But what's even also interesting is that he's not going where he's supposed to go. He tells his brother, you go on ahead and I'll meet you there, and he doesn't. What did God appear to him when he was still in Padan Aram with Uncle Laban, and he told him what? Return to the land of your fathers and to your father's house. But what's interesting is he doesn't go there either. Where does he go? He goes to Shechem. If you cross the Jabbok and then you cross the Jordan, the Yarden, he would have had to turn left and head south to go see his brother or his dad, because they were both down south. He turns right and goes north and goes to Shechem. So he is not only telling his brother Esau, you head south and I'll meet you there, and he doesn't, but God tells him explicitly, return to the land of your fathers and to your father's house. He does not. He goes to Shechem instead. It just seems odd to me that he's now 2 times supposed to be in one place and is not. I don't know exactly what that means, but it seems suggestive perhaps that he's not where he's supposed to be in a spiritual as well as a physical sense, because of what happens when he goes to Shechem. And we're going to read that in just a couple of minutes here, what happens when he goes to Shechem. Nothing good.
Do you think there's a significance to him stopping and building and Sukkot?
I do, yeah, I absolutely do.
The Exodus stop location where that was the first place.
When does what happen?
Verse 17
Of 34?
of 33.
Oh.
Before he gets to Shechem.
Oh, yeah. Okay, I gotcha. Yes.
So that's like their first stop, kind of like that was their first stop during the Exodus.
Right.
Did they cross the Jordan?
Yeah, it seems like as soon as he crossed the Jordan, he went on to Sukkot. That's obviously a weird name, you know what I mean? Is because there's a couple of different places that are named Sukkot in the Tanakh, but they're clearly not in the same place. And it has been suggested that that is not actually a place name, but a place that is named simply because of what happened there, that Jacob kind of built some kind of temporary shelters for his cattle, and that's why they called it Sukkot, but the name of the place wasn't actually Sukkot. I don't really know, because that's exactly what happened when the Hebrews left Egypt. They stopped, and they suggest, by they I mean like Bible scholars suggest that place actually wasn't named Sukkot, but they kind of named it that because that's what they did there. But I think that there certainly could be some
After this kind of dramatic chase scene.
yes, that's what makes me think that there's something significant there. I mean, you're fleeing from your enemies. God provides you a great deliverance, and then you're setting up a temporary shelter and calling it Sukkot. It's kind of an interesting thing, and I'm not sure exactly what to make of it, but that relates to some further study for you guys too, is maybe putting a mark by that word Sukkot there in the text and looking at it later. Angela?
Was the Sukkot before they crossed the water?
Yes.
This one's after they crossed the water?
Yes. Are you just making notes, or are you building up to something? I'm wondering about you. I got to watch out for you. So thinking about, Jacob, the places that Jacob goes is certainly curious. You got Sukkot, you got him saying, I'm going to be in one place, and then he doesn't go there. And then God tells him, go here, and he doesn't go there. He goes the opposite direction. It reminds me of Abraham, when we were studying Abraham a little while back, and God said, go to this land, and he stops in one place, and things start going really well, and he's being blessed by God, and he builds an altar, and then the further south he travels, the worse things get. All kinds of complications start arising. So it kind of reminds me of that. I'm not sure about the connection. Go ahead.
Did Isaac always go where he was supposed to?
That's a great question. We don't know about him traveling too much. I mean, he goes to the land with the Philistines. What's that?
He was told not to.
He was told not to leave the land, yes. There was a famine, and he was told, do not leave the land. But he went and stuck around by the Philistines and became really powerful, and they said, hey, move away from us because you're too powerful. So he went further south. But that's, I think, the only reference that we have to him traveling or moving around very much at all. Yeah, he's specifically told not to leave the land. So, questions, comments, concerns about that section there?
There's a Psalm 60 that says that the beloved may be delivered, save with thy right hand, and hear me. God has spoken in holiness and will rejoice. I will divide Shechem and meet out of the valley of Sukkot. That's
Say what?
Psalm 60, verse 6, talks about these two locations together.
Can you read that one more time for me, Mike?
God has spoken in his holiness. I will rejoice. I will divide Shechem and meet out the valley of Sukkot.
Meet out?
Meet out, like dividing up and divvying it up.
Measure.
That's a good connection. There's probably is some type of significance there. I would make a note in regards to that to kind of link those two, because I think there's probably something there to look at. Okay, cool. I'm going to move forward just a little bit to Genesis 34, and I'll go ahead and read this. It's not terribly long. It's the situation with Dinah and Shechem. So in Genesis 34, here we go. It happened, or one time, Dinah, the daughter of Leah, whom she had borne to Jacob, went out to visit the local ladies of the town, apparently. And Shechem, the son of Hamor, the Hivite, the local ruler, saw her, grabbed her, raped her, and humiliated her. But actually, he was strongly attracted to Dinah, the daughter of Jacob. He fell in love with the girl and tried to win her affection. It says in the text that he spoke to her heart. Shechem spoke with his father Hamor and said, "Get this girl for me. I want her to be my wife." When Jacob heard that he had defiled his daughter Dinah, his sons were with his livestock in the field. So Jacob restrained himself until they came. Hamor, the father of Shechem, went out to Jacob to speak with him, just as Jacob's sons were coming in from the field. When they heard what had happened, the men were saddened and were very angry at the outrage this man had committed against Israel by raping Jacob's daughter, something that is simply not done. Make a note to yourself that that word Israel right there is the first time that that word is used after the name change, and it is kind of uncertain about whether it's talking about the people of Israel and referring to Jacob and his family, or whether it's talking about Jacob. It's just weird that it's right next to the word Jacob again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Are they right next door to each other?
What's that?
In the Hebrew, are those right next door to each other?
I believe that they're separated by one word. I'd have to double check that. That is verse 8. No, 7, excuse me. The end of verse 7. It says this man, they were angry that this outrage that this man had committed against Israel by raping Jacob's daughter. Something that is simply not done. But Hamor said to them, "My son Shechem's heart is set on your daughter. Please give her to him as his wife and intermarry with us. Give your daughters to us and take our daughters for yourselves. You will live with us and the land will be available to you. You'll live, do business, and acquire possessions here." Then Shechem said to her father and brothers, "Only accept me, and I will give whatever you tell me. Ask as large a bride price as you like. I'll pay whatever you tell me. Just let me marry the girl." Now the sons of Jacob answered Shechem and Hamor his father deceitfully, because he had defiled Dinah their sister. They said to them, "We cannot do it, because it would be a disgrace to give our sister to someone who hasn't been circumcised. Only on this condition will we consent to what you are asking, that you become like us, by having every male among you get circumcised. Then we'll give you our daughters, and we'll take your daughters for ourselves, and we'll live with you and become one people. But if you won't do as we say and get circumcised, then we'll take our daughter and go away." What they said seemed fair to Hamor and Shechem, the son of Hamor. And the young man did not put off doing what was asked of him, even though he was the most respected member of his father's family, because he so much wanted Jacob's daughter. Hamor and Shechem his son came to the entrance of their city and spoke with its leading men and said, "These men are peaceful toward us. Therefore let them live in the land and do business in it. For as you can see, the land is large enough for them. Let us take their daughters as wives for ourselves, and we'll give them our daughters. But the people will consent to live with us only on the condition that every male among us gets circumcised as they themselves are circumcised. Won't their cattle, their possessions, and all their animals be ours? Only let's consent to do what they ask, and then they will live with us." Everyone going out the city's gate listened to Hamor and Shechem his son. So every male was circumcised, every one that went out the gate of the city. On the third day after the circumcision, when they were in pain, two of Jacob's sons, Shimon and Levi, Dinah's brothers, took their swords, boldly descended on the city, and slaughtered all the males. They killed Hamor and Shechem, his son, with their swords, took Dinah out of Shechem's house, and left. Then the sons of Jacob entered over the dead bodies of those who had been slaughtered and plundered the city in reprisal for defiling their sister. They took their flocks, cattle, and donkeys and everything else, whether in the city or in the field, everything they owned. Their children and wives they took captive, and they looted whatever was in the houses. But Jacob said to Shimon and Levi, "You have caused me trouble by making me stink in the opinion of the local inhabitants. The Canaanites and the Perizzites, since I don't have many people, they'll align themselves together against me and attack me, and I will be destroyed, I and my household." And they replied, "Should we let our sister be treated like a whore?" This is a most fascinating section here. There's so much significance going on here that it's kind of hard to wrap your mind around it. There's so much of even prophetic significance, I think. Now, the first thing that's the obvious question here is, why did this happen? What is the cause of this? It's interesting to me that both Jewish and Christian commentators of a certain age have suggested that Dinah brought this on herself. Do you see anything that might suggest that to you? That this is actually kind of Dinah's fault? No? It's right there, according to them, in the very first sentence, that Dinah, the daughter of Jacob, went out to visit the local girls. Now, that didn't really stick out to me, but according to rabbinic tradition and Christian tradition, this it seems odd to us because of the culture that we live in and the way that this is a touchy subject, but because of women's liberation and women are no longer barefoot and pregnant in the kitchen, our women in America and in the West are extremely liberated. They can do whatever they want, you know what I'm saying? But to a more traditional culture, this little section right here at the beginning of verse 1, where Dinah went out to visit the local girls, is like some kind of an abomination. That the woman is not supposed to leave the father's house, and is not, under no circumstances should a young girl, and they estimate that she's probably about 15, that she, under no circumstances should she have left her father's house and his encampment and his people to go into the city where there was some kind of a party going on.
It seems problematic, though, to commentate that it's her fault that she got raped.
I agree. It harkens back to a certain day, even in America, though, where you could. It's certainly not that way now. And anybody who says something like that now, you would call them a misogynist or a sexist or something. But it was very common back in the days here in America, where if a woman was revealing certain body parts or something, that men would literally say, "Oh, she's asking for it," or something like that. That was quite common in America not long ago. Not in my day.
It's not that necessarily it's her fault. It's just if she is going outside of that fence of protection, something may happen. It's kind of like, God gives us these laws and rules, and I don't know if that's what's taking place here because it's information, but assuming so, she took it upon herself to go outside of that, then things may happen at that point.
Yeah, that's part of it, and I'm not suggesting that anybody that I have read is suggesting that she was dressed provocatively or was asking for it in that way. I certainly don't mean to imply that. What I was.
Outside of her father's house.
Yes, and from I think I mentioned a couple of times a week or so ago that I have been reading with the children this cultural study of first century Israel and how the family worked and everything and what life was like. And from all accounts that I can find, whether Christian or Jewish or just studying the history, a young woman, for her to leave her father's house and to go out into the city alone was just crazy, just not heard of at all. And therefore they've speculated what was she doing there? How is it that she was there? And I can't explain it, and nobody else can definitively, but many have speculated that she wanted to be a part of the local scene, the local life, find out what was going on. I'm tired of hanging out with my brothers and sisters and the family by the tents and the sheep and the goats and the herds, and there's something happening. There's a happening going on in the city, with this big party, and that she went, and she left the protection of her father's house, and she kind of brought it on herself. I have a hard time swallowing that myself, but I understand from a cultural perspective where they're coming from.
Where is Shechem? Jerusalem in Shechem?
No, it's near the current city of Nablus in the West Bank.
Okay.
North, about 20 miles north of Jerusalem.
Between the two mountains.
Between Mount Ebal and Mount, yes.
Okay. I thought the tree.
I have this weird translation because in 33 it says he came in peace to Shechem, but this other translation says he came into the city of Shalom or Salem in Shechem.
That is weird.
It is.
Same one.
That's what I have confusion about that. I'm not going to go into what it is. It's just that Salem is in Shechem.
Mm-hmm.
And so if we consider what Salem is that Jerusalem, the true Jerusalem, I don't know. I'm not going to go into it, but there is a connection to Salem and Shechem.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, I didn't know.
That's an interesting thing, and I have heard something like that before, but I don't know. That's a good question.
Kind of sounds like that rule's in place for a reason. Because one of the girls in my Facebook was talking about, you have a fence that the sheep stay in, and even if you put a toe over, God cannot protect you. Where He cannot protect
He certainly
you,
can.
outside.
He certainly can, but
But it's harder because
Well-
He says, "Hey, I built this for you."
I think maybe a better way to look at it is that He offers protection within the boundaries, and if you step outside of the boundaries, it's not that He can't protect you, it's probably that He won't.
He's giving you what you have chosen.
He's giving you what you've chosen. He is allowing your own consequences.
Because
Yeah.
what girls back then, they didn't like today. Girls can be hurt.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you can see that happening so often with young ladies in our own culture is that they're definitely out from under the protection of their families. I mean, they're out, doing whatever, and many getting into serious trouble, whether it's being raped or becoming sexually promiscuous in some other way, doing it themselves, voluntarily, which I think is so interesting because did you notice the development of this quote-unquote relationship between Dinah and Shechem? Which is so odd, but what is so odd about it is it perfectly mirrors the development of relationships in modern America. First we have sex, then we develop a relationship. We have sex, we decide whether we like each other, and then we get married. That is completely backwards of what the biblical recommendation to keep that fence in place. What's so weird about that is this perfectly mirrors what is so common in Western culture today. We start with sex, then either get married and then develop the relationship, or develop the relationship and then get married. It's just completely backwards. So strange. So strange. And I that's what's kind of weird about this. As I was reading some commentaries and looking deeper into this text, it just struck me so weirdly that this is so representative of modern Western culture. What's happening right here. with the young woman leaving the shelter of the father's protection, going out to do a little partying with people, gets in over her head, gets herself in trouble, and then somehow we're going to develop a relationship in the most backward sense. Very strange happenings here. Angela, go ahead.
Okay, intimacy, and then develop the relationship, and then get married.
What do you see as a spiritual metaphor here?
Circumcision of the heart, and then we develop the relationship with the Spirit, and then we get married. Bridegroom. Is that not the way the relationship works with our
In a
Christianity?
spiritual sense. Within Christianity?
Well, if you just take the last 2,000 years. Isn't
Okay,
that
so you're not saying this is the way it should be in a spiritual sense. You're saying this is the way it's happened.
This is the way it's happened.
Elaborate just a little bit. Because I see what you're putting down there, and I think that's a fascinating insight.
They don't. What people don't understand is that they are already married. Maybe that they think it's something that's going to happen later, like the covenant of Messiah.
Yeah, there's an engagement, but the actual wedding doesn't take place until he returns, right? That's the last thing on the agenda.
Yeah.
After the relationship, which is after the fixing he did to reestablish intimacy with God.
Okay, so maybe it's better look at that same metaphor within the context of Kedoshim, that period of betrothal.
Yes, as if you are.
But what's interesting to me is that the brothers went to the Shekemites and said, you need to be circumcised. Which to me sounds like it's exactly what was happening right after the resurrection. When Israel is saying, you need to be circumcised. And this results in mass death and a harlot. Or should she be treated like a harlot? There's this whole theme going on there. That
Yes.
sounds like what has gone wrong. I'm not saying that's the way it should be. I'm just saying maybe
That's what
the
has happened.
way it would go.
Okay. All right. That's an excellent insight. Now, I want to throw you in one further element to take a look at. What's that?
I'm not ready for that.
No, this will maybe help to elucidate it a little bit, because there's another situation that happens that is remarkably similar to this.
What?
The incident at Baal Peor. Do you remember that? It has to do with the prophet Balaam.
Oh, when he said, go and mingle with them?
Yes. Mingle with them. Entice them away from their God, because their God has blessed them, and I cannot
But
pronounce a
she
curse
had
on them.
mingled with them. They didn't come.
Yes, that is true. That's really one of the only differences there, is that this time she is going to mingle with them, but in the incident of Baal Peor, the Midianites are enticing the Israelites away from God. Both times it's with sexual promiscuity. Both times there is a great slaughter as soon as it happens. So there's some real interesting... That is where Pincus rams his sword through the man and the woman and kills them both at the same time. Yes. Now, can you say that the sons of Jacob are legitimately slaughtering this whole town? I mean, I thought to myself, okay, this is really weird. How do these two guys go and slaughter all these people? That's a really interesting thing. And I thought, okay, the town is small. It's a provincial little thing, maybe there's 40, 50 people there. According to historical records, this is a pretty big place. This is a provincial seat of power, and that Hamor is basically ruling a fairly decent-sized kingdom, and that these brothers went and slaughtered everyone, quite a number of people, and pillaged and looted the entire place. This was a great slaughter. And if you read, like, in the book of Jasher, it gives you, like, full details about what went on here. It's really interesting. It's like Rambo and his brother went out and...
X-Men.
It's kind of like the X-Men, yes. It's like a cartoon. It's like a comic book, man. I mean, Simeon and Levi are like superheroes, you know. They can jump 100 feet in the air, and they're just slaughtering people in superhuman feats.
But what they did wasn't right. And I think that's reflected when the blessings go out and why Judah becomes the lead of the family.
What?
Oh, I got heartburn.
Oh, no, that's all right. No, that is, Jacob later on, when he's giving the blessings, makes comment about what these brothers did, and he says it's truly evil. Is that what your interpretation of this is? That this was not good, that the Jacob's children should certainly not have done this? This was not a righteous response? Go ahead.
Now, I'm just thinking of how the Jews were supposed to be a light to the world. They were supposed to share this. I mean, they were supposed to be the conduit.
Mm-hmm.
What they did was they hoarded it. And they said, ooh, you, and you're special. And they didn't do what they were supposed to in the whole being a light sense. And that's almost like what's going on here. It's like, ooh, you, there's you, and then there's us, and we're going to create this division.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And maybe that came back on them because now they have the other guy's going, ooh, you.
Yeah, that's an interesting insight. You know what's interesting is what is actually being proposed here with this proposal of Hamor and Shechem. You realize that it's kind of subtle, but if you look at it, what's very interesting is that Hamor and Shechem are proposing to Jacob and his family a unity of peoples, saying, we will become one people. We will become like you. Now, was it their intent to become like the Hebrews?
No.
No, it was not. What did they basically want?
Well, in 23, they wanted all their stuff.
Yes. Isn't their stuff going to become our stuff? It's basically about them plundering Israel and basically kind of deceitfully saying, we'll become one with you. You realize that this would be unifying the lines of Shem and the lines of Ham. If this proposal moves forward and they do get circumcised and become one people, that would bring together the line of Shem and the line of Canaan, Ham's cursed son. The line of blessing and the line of cursing would have become one. That is another very interesting coincidence that kind of relates to the Baal of Peor, when the Israelites got sucked into this relationship kind of situation with the Midianites. I think that this was a plan of the adversary to try to dilute and attack the people of God in a really subtle way. Not through war, but through infiltration and getting some assimilation going on. It's a really subtle ploy. It wasn't so subtle exactly with the rape and kind of forced shotgun marriage. I mean, it seems like Shechem took Dinah and is holding her captive in his house, because it says that when the boys went in and destroyed this place, they rescued their sister from his house and brought her out. So he not only raped her, he kidnapped her, and then sent his dad to kind of negotiate some kind of peace treaty, can't we all just get along kind of thing, which is, again, totally backwards and weird, but they are attempting to become one people through some subtlety in order to get their stuff. Won't this man's possessions become ours? He's probably got a whole slew of daughters. Dinah is the only daughter that is named, but there's no question in the historical record that Jacob probably had many daughters, and Dinah is only one of them. So it's a very interesting incident here at Baal Peor. Questions, comments, concerns regarding this little section?
At the end of Genesis, when he's talking about Simeon and Levi, the hamstrung player, how does that relate to this?
Yeah, that's a great question. I've always wondered about that, because there's no evidence of them destroying animals. But what's curious to me is that it says that they take them all, but what's interesting is that the only other time that I'm aware of where we're talking about hamstringing horses is when God gives the instructions to the Israelites. It's like, when you come across chariots and horses in battle, you will burn the chariots and hamstring the horses. Because God apparently didn't want them relying on horses and chariots. That's what is the connection there? I don't know. It's definitely weird because I don't see any evidence of. It seems to say that they took all of the animals, but in some way did they hamstring the horses?
There's got to be some sort of spiritual thing there. Because it says that in their anger they killed a man, and in self-will they hamstrung a bull.
Mm-hmm. It's weird. I really don't know, man. Do you have an idea? I don't either. I've often wondered about that. And what is that a reference to? Because it's not clear in the text to me. What is that referring to?
What is it?
It says in the prophecy of Jacob, is it in chapter 49 or 50? 49. In Genesis 49, Jacob is giving blessings, talking prophetically regarding each one of his sons, and he said, cursed is the anger of Simeon and Levi because they killed men or a man and hamstrung horses. But it doesn't say anything about them hamstringing horses or a bull or whatever that is in this text, so I'm not sure what that is a reference to.
But it is supposed to be talking about this.
That is the common interpretation, is that he is...
Bull be the guy that actually did the crime, because bulls are kind of forceful and...
That is something that I have heard of and I've thought of myself, wondering if... And that wouldn't be totally unheard of, to be referencing a man as an animal, as a bull. It's certainly possible. Something to think about.
Maybe it's the circumcision thing. What is hamstringing?
It's like cutting the tendons on the back of their feet so they are hobbled. They can't walk. It's basically which seems particular.
Into the city before they kill them.
That's an interesting insight. That's true. If you
They cut their hand.
they cut their ham. It's interesting to think about, actually, because that's precisely. If you were to hamstring an ox or hamstring a horse, that would just be cruel. You're just crippling the animal and it can't walk and it's going to die. But why in the heck would you do that? If you wanted to kill a horse, you just kill it. You don't hamstring it. But these men of this city of Shechem were hamstrung by being circumcised. They're kind of lamed.
They're hearing all their friends die as these guys move through the city, and there's nothing they can do about it because they have been disabled.
They have been hamstrung. I don't know. That's an interesting insight. That is kind of interesting. Darren, what were you going to say, buddy?
I just like how they thought they were going to take all their possessions and they flipped it and took all theirs.
They flipped the script, didn't
They
they?
were being deceitful when they were actually the ones being deceived.
Yeah. Well, what's interesting, too, is that in this section right here, it says that Simeon and Levi went in and began to slaughter all these people. But then when you look at verse 27, it says after they did that, then the sons of Jacob entered over the dead bodies of those who had been killed and plundered the city. There's a suggestion there that all the sons of Jacob then took part in the plunder. That it was Simeon and Levi who killed everyone, but then all of the sons joined in to plunder the place. I don't know. Curious stuff. We can see that Jacob's sons, I think, definitively have acted wickedly here. You know how the rabbis and the Jewish people sometimes will make up the most weird and outlandish stuff in order to make the patriarchs seem like they can do no wrong? And so they have maybe suggested that the men of this city deserve to die. Can you think of any reason why the men of this city deserve to die according to Torah law? Do you know any of the Torah law regarding a rape? in a city. There is a specific Torah law regarding a rape in a city and a rape out in the country.
Something about hearing.
Something about hearing. Yes. There is a suggestion that Dinah was screaming and crying out for help, and that the men of the city, some of them heard it and did nothing, and others heard about it and did nothing. That the people of the city knew what had happened, and because they were afraid of Shechem and Hamor, because these are men in a position of power, they refused to stand up to the people in power in their city and to do what is right and seek justice for this girl. And that is why they are worthy of death. I thought that was interesting. It's an interesting insight, but you would certainly, I don't see any deliberations going on here where the sons of Jacob are saying, who heard it, who didn't. But there's also something interesting about that is suggestive when it says that, who does it say specifically got circumcised? Does it say that everyone in the city was circumcised and went along with this plan? No, it does not. It says that the men who went in and out of the city gate got circumcised. That is suggestive, because who goes in and out at the city gate? Who's hanging out at the city gate? The rulers of the city, the judges. The leading men are the ones who hang out at the city gate. And it doesn't literally say, it says here that in verse 24, it says, everyone going out the city's gate listened to Hamor and Shechem and his sons, so every male was circumcised, every one that went out of the gate of the city. It doesn't say that every male in the whole city got circumcised. It suggests that the leading men, the most powerful men of the city gates, went and were circumcised. But it does say that when the sons of Jacob went and slaughtered all the males. That, I think, is suggestive also. So is it possible that certain of the members of the ruling class might have been worthy of death? Potentially. I don't know. Maybe if there was some kind of party going on at the king's palace with Shechem and his son Hamor, who's likely to be at the king's son's party? The rulers who are going out at the city gate. This is the elite of the city are hanging out together, and maybe they did deserve to die. But Jacob and Jacob's sons went and killed everyone, all the males. Don't know. It's very, very interesting. I don't know that we can say that all of these people deserve to die. Did some of them deserve to die? Well, perhaps, according to Torah law, but the Torah hasn't been given yet. But that doesn't necessarily mean, I think we know, that just because the Torah hasn't been given yet doesn't mean that people aren't living according to the Torah. I think there's plenty of biblical evidence to suggest that the patriarchs and even some of these heathens are living according to certain Torah rules. You can see some very interesting similarities in the Code of Hammurabi from the area of Ur of the Chaldeans. Has the first codified laws written in human history on huge slabs of basalt in the desert in Iraq. They predate the Torah by 600 or 700 years. So it's possible that was a situation of law being in place to protect women and that they had a similar law. Don't know. It's very curious to me. Any other comments, questions, or concerns regarding this section?
I've seen some other translations of that chapter 49 as the hamstring and rope that it says, dig down a wall.
Dig down a wall.
Dig down a wall.
Like it as an alternate translation to hamstringing ox or something like that? Well, that's interesting because in the book of Jasher, where you get more details regarding their attack on this city, there is some walls being knocked over and toppling walls. I don't know what to make of that. That's certainly interesting. Well, let us pray then, and we will fellowship together.